Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Demand the Truth. This is an individual I've been looking to get on for a very long time. Very interesting individual, very well-credentialed journalist, and he covers topics that other people are very afraid to do. And especially now what's going on in the UK, it's going to be very interesting to chat with him. Welcome to the show, Tony. Thank you very much for being here. And for people that don't know about you, why don't you give them a little brief overview about yourself?
Well, no, Will, it's my pleasure. Thanks very much for asking me. I think I've had a pretty unique time here in the UK, as I've always been extremely anti-establishment, sceptical about the elites, but I actually did spend several years working at the heart of the beast at the BBC and getting to know, I think, at the cutting edge, how it really works. And I suppose they did a fantastic job in training me back in the late 1980s, early 1990s. These were skills that I just thought, well, okay, so they booted me out over Edward Heath, and I believe anyway. I mean, I had no hard evidence for that, but it was circumstantial. And, the child abusing Tory Prime Minister who had retired and was living in Salisbury where I was working for them. And so I've seen how it works. And I've also was there at a very interesting time in the 80s and 90s where you could see the way that the organisation was changing from a genuine public service remit organisation, which was set up after the war, really, the television side of it mainly, but had a spirit after the war of challenging the establishment. People like Bernard Levin, David Frost, these characters were there to call absolutely independent-mindedly, call the politicians, the bankers, the businessmen, call them to account live on air. And they used to do that in the 1950s and 60s. And I could see what was happening in the 80s and 90s, that a whole new breed of individuals, some of them with no real sort of gift or talent for broadcasting, but people who quite clearly had an agenda, were elbowing the decent people out. And I could see that actually happening before my eyes. And we were working in London in a newsroom at Marylebone High Street, and we had a fantastic news editor at the time, a guy called James Cameron, and we were the best radio station in London, I have to say. We had some of the top personality DJs who were also pretty anti-establishment, people like Johnny Walker, Tommy Vance at the US, people may not heard of, but people all over the UK from pirate radio days knew them. And we also had a fantastic news team. We used to beat everyone to every story if we could, and there was a very good, healthy competition right across London to give the people what they needed to know. And then, of course, the first Gulf War happened while I was there, and we started to really get our teeth into doing international coverage as well, even though we were only actually a London station. We were doing better in some ways than I think the network radio was doing. So that was how I got started in journalism, and I've been kind of doing it on and off ever since, really, Will.
Yeah, and I'm very glad that you could join our show. Now, let's jump right into what's going on in the UK right now, because this is actually one of the few things, like you said, some of the American viewers may not be familiar with all the names that you said, but even here in the United States, where we're largely ignorant to the matters of the rest of the world, we're still hearing bits and pieces of news, what's going on in the UK. What's your take on things over there?
Well, we've just had this first Christmas general election for 100 years or so. And the other thing is that the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn have done as badly. I think it's roughly 100 years since they've done so badly, and this is really because the Labour Party is a party divided. It's got two factions, both quite strong, really, as a sort of traditional socialist left wing, egalitarian social justice side of it. But then there's also this kind of new age Blairite area in the party, which is actually much more akin to the Tories. So they've got this complete split. The argument goes at something like this: well, we need to change the whole system, and those are the socialists that want to do that. And there are others that say, well, we need to appeal to the middle ground voters, and these are the acolytes of the former Tony Blair. Although he's not, he's still around. He should be behind bars, of course, but he's not. And it's been quite clear, looking at this election campaign, which Labour roundly lost with a landslide to Boris Johnson and the Conservatives, is that the old guard of what they used to call New Labour that won in the 1990s and took the party through into the noughties, as with Gordon Brown, making sure that the Labour Party was in charge when we had the biggest heist in history in 2008. That they what they say is effectively, look, you can't actually win an election without us and the money that we provide, and that we've so that's the Labour Party is a schizophrenic thing, and they need to get themselves sorted out. The Conservatives, it has to be said, has got a similar sort of thing going on with them. But what happened a couple of months ago was Boris Johnson had a whole bunch of Tory rebels who were rebelling against his position on Brexit just after he'd been elected by the Conservative membership as the new Prime Minister to take over from Theresa May. And Boris dealt with this as anyone who's a decent leader has to do, and that is to all of those people that then rebelled after he'd taken over were just literally poleaxed out of the party. And they were told, well, you can't stand in the next general election, whenever it is, and you're no longer a Conservative MP. You can't use my little ticket to try and get elected next time. So that's what Corbyn should have done when he won roundly back in 2017 against Theresa May. He did very well. He didn't win, but he did much better than they previously done. He was then in a very strong position. He could have done something like that to make sure that all of his enemies, the people who've been actively working against him in the Labour Party, are gone, but he didn't do it. And so he's paid the price. And, in a way, you have to say, great guy though he is, lovely bloke, he just wasn't up to being a leader. He wasn't tough enough to deal with, he wanted everyone to be his mate, all around the table, all sides, we can all get along. But of course, the people who are his enemies are never going to get along with. So if you start treating your enemies better than you treat your friends, and there are two MPs, not MP, he was Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone in the Labour Party, and a guy called Chris Williamson, who's an MP up in the north of England, who are both very, very good, I would suggest very anti the Israeli racist abuse of Palestine, very, very good on social policy generally, extremely articulate, very forceful. Both of them were booted out of the party, even though they were very staunch Corbyn allies. And yet others like Peter Mandelson, Lord Mandelson, who's worked for the Rothschild company in the past. He was minister under Blair, minister without portfolio. He has actually said, I try to undermine Corbyn every single day. And he is kept in the party. So when you're being nicer to your enemies than you are to your friends, then you really do deserve to lose. And that's what's happened to Corbyn. Today they've announced that someone called Rebecca Long-Bailey may be taking over, and that's the person they want. But she is, I would suggest, far too young, naive. And in a way, the Labour Party leadership at the moment has been living in cloud cuckoo land over Brexit. They just haven't accepted that the vote happened, and they should have gone along with that. The Blairites persuaded Corbyn to go against his instincts and embrace Remain, which has helped lose him this election. So we've got a very weak Labour Party, and right now a very strong Conservative Party with all sorts of rather nasty policies as well. Okay, the Brexit thing, we can all go along with now. We have to leave the EU, but he's got very damaging policies towards things like gypsies and travellers, which are a long, long tradition, probably back to the dawn of time. But he's going to try and get them criminalised and taken off the road, really, because they show an alternative way of doing things. And the Conservatives and their backers in the City of London want everyone to understand, if you want to exist in this world, you need to pay a mortgage, you need to pay rent, and you need to get into the money system. You need to become a wage slave at the very bottom level and then work your way up. And the gypsies and the travellers and similar people, the squatters, just simply don't want to do that. And so that's why the Conservatives are punishing them. And in fact, of course, this is racist legislation, racist policy, and it's exactly prohibited in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But they don't seem to care about that. They just want a bunch of miserable slaves, I think, because it's been very good for some people, conservatism, if you've got money, but if you haven't, the cost of living is so high in this country. It's basically the housing racket. It's run by the
Tony,
mob.
Sorry to interrupt here, but yeah, I think you're right. For certain members of the Conservative or even the Labour Party, they're probably doing pretty well off. Could you give us a little juxtaposition of how it is just to be an ordinary wage-paying slave in the UK? How has UK society changed? Can you give us a juxtaposition? Because here in the United States, we don't get a good picture from the outside. And follow up on that too, do you actually think Brexit will actually ever happen?
Well, I think the answer to the second question first, Brexit, yes, I think it is going to happen next year. We'll just have to see. But, I don't think Boris has got anything to gain by, by betraying the entire country. I really don't. But anyway, coming back to what life is like, well, I've seen lots and lots of changes. And in fact, this is one of the reasons why the Labour Party lost so badly, is because in the industrial north of England, where the factories, steelworks, a whole load of manufacturing industry, even things like the potteries. There was an enormous amount of industry in the north of England, making this, that, and everything, and selling it all around the world. That have been there really from empire days in the 1920s, 30s, 40s. These people are really annoyed because they've seen Thatcherism and they've seen the European Union absolutely gut that area. So what's happened is foreign money has come in and bought up these industries and then shut them down, and leaving the more efficient competition to what was their competition, but more efficient in places like France and Germany to carry on. And so there's a lot of people in the north of England who feel totally betrayed, both by the Tory Thatcherism, but also by the European Union, because it's the idea of being able to move money around between borders which has really allowed all this money to come in, buy up, and shut down. There's a bit of an old adage, but it says that you can take over a country using banks. You don't need tanks. And the Germans, the Nazis, occupied Europe with their tanks, but they were also buying up these businesses, and some of them the tanks went round because they'd already bought them up. But that's happened very much in the north of England. And so we do definitely need a whole kind of industrial policy that's based in the UK ever since 1973 and 1975. British industrial policy has been organised from Brussels, and it's been a total disaster. So the fact that the jobs are not there, the wages are not there for young people to come up, and also the cost of living has risen enormously. Most of the money made in Britain now, it seems, is made through housing, where people are paying exorbitant amounts just literally to do nothing, to have a roof over their heads. And this, I think, is going to potentially cause all sorts of problems. And maybe there'll be a reset in the housing market. Who knows? But that's what it's like for ordinary people. They're struggling just to survive. There is some sort of social security, but this is welfare payments. But that has also been horrendously eroded, even for the disabled and elderly. They've had a lot of their basic needs taken away, and so we've got great big long queues outside food banks. It's almost become a third world country, Will, with people scrabbling for some work, desperate, absolutely desperate. And of course, the Labour Party were promising to fix all that, but it's not entirely sure whether they could do under EU rules, because they have a lot of. Basically, the big businesses can take the government to court in the European Court of Justice. And it's not by no means guaranteed a government can actually do what it promises in its manifesto in the EU. So that's the basic situation. And there's a lot of people having great difficulty getting work. And even if they do, work is no longer a route out of poverty. Remember, get me on this one. You can't get out of being poor by working. So a lot of people are shrugging their shoulders and saying, well, what's the point of working then?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. At this point, when my grandparents were growing up, my grandfather could take his money he got from the army, work at the post office, and support 8 kids. And my grandma didn't have to work. Nowadays, if you want to support yourself, you got to work. Your wife got to work 2 jobs. You got to have a side hustle too. So it's absolutely crazy. Now, that's what it's like for the ordinary person there in the UK. But another topic that you've been covering for many, many years, and thank you for doing it, by the way, too, is the connection between our elites that you have over there, the elites that we have in government in America, in the Vatican, people also, the royal family of Netherlands and so forth. We have people like Heath, Dershowitz, Lady Rothschilds, Prince Andrew, Peter Ball, Saville, Prince Charles, Epstein, all hanging around. Some of these people are nefarious characters. And you've been one of the first people to report and expose on all this. What is going on with pedophilia in these elite circles? What the hell is going on?
Well, okay, so it's all about blackmail. That's what the Epstein operation was about. You bring people in, you get photographs of them, film of them, and then you can propel them into power in the knowledge that if they start to think for themselves, then you can just dangle those photos in front of their face and say, do you want this on the front page of the Daily Mail tomorrow? It's blackmail, pure and simple. That's what it's all about. And it's, of course, a mafia, a mob operation, the crime family, international organised crime. I mean, I think the evidence is from Whitney Webb in Mint Press News has put a pretty strong case. And we've also seen a Mossad agent, a former Mossad agent, also saying that it's almost certain that Epstein was working for the Israelis. And he, literally was being helped in an organised crime based in Israel. So this is the Israeli mafia. And that's a separate operation, really, I think, to the Bilderbergs, which I've been studying for many years. The Bilderberg group is literally the power elite's little place where they pick the politicians. So they will invite people who are up-and-coming politicians in the future, maybe the leader of a quite strong-looking opposition party, and then they just decide, do we want this person or not? And you'll find, that so often with people like Blair, Clinton, and the rest of them, they turn up at a Bilderberg conference and suddenly, within a year or 2 years, they're running the country, because once the Bilderberg pats you on the back and Henry Kissinger likes the cut of your jib, you'll find that you'll get loads of TV appearances because a lot of the media are there, sworn to silence, of course, and never talking about it on their own networks. And so this is really just a kind of elite club, almost a cult around power and money, and it's very much linked up with the NATO countries. So you won't find anyone from Africa, or you may do, but there'll be a token person. It's just literally the NATO countries. It is the political arm of NATO in a way, and it's the politicians' selection arm. And when we think we're voting, certainly in the US elections, it's really clear. You're voting between two awful people generally, and they're both been picked by the Bilderbergs for you. So, I mean, I'm pretty clear that this organisation began with in 1950s. And it was a consolidation of the links between Nazi Germany and the Allies. So you'll find people like Prince Bernhard, who was a Nazi spy, chairing the Bilderberg Conference from the mid-1950s. You'll find Lord Carrington, a British guy who was a Nazi collaborator at the Battle of Arnhem, in making sure that they lost that battle. He also pops up as a Bilderberg chairman. So they like their little in-jokes, and that's why they met for the first time at the Bilderberg Hotel in Oosterbeek, because that's where this Battle of Arnhem took place in the 1940s, where the American paratroopers fought really well, but the British were totally betrayed by their own side and left to die by people like Carrington. And that was in order to allow the Nazis to have another few months to squirrel away all their wealth so it could go to the organised crime gangs, mates of Winston Churchill and things after the Second World War will.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I know we're running out of time here. If you could briefly give me kind of any ideas that you have for the future. I know they're getting more and more difficult to find out when Bilderberg is happening. We've had Trump also send representatives Wilbur Ross, who coincidentally was a Rothschild banker. What do you think is happening in the future, Bilderberg and otherwise, and what's the best place for people to find you and support your amazing work?
Well, I mean, you can have a listen or a live stream of our program every Friday, which is a live show. It's off for 2 weeks now for Christmas, and we'll be back in the new year. But that's at thisweek.org.uk. You can find our 9/11 forum, which I've been editing really for, must be 10 years now. And that is 9/11 forum. That's a letters 911 forum.org.uk, where we just keep an eye on everything, really. All stories that are interesting you'll find on there somewhere. Various assassination attempts, terrorist attacks, pulling them apart. A lot of history as well, because I think this is the one thing that the mainstream media will never tell us, is putting these current events into this historical context. The deals done, as I was saying, between the Nazis and the Allies at the end of the Second World War really have to be seen to be believed. I mean, of course, we know that everybody wanted the enriched uranium the Nazis had. Not so many people realise that the atomic bombs in Japan, they may well have only had one if it hadn't been for the Nazi uranium helping them out. And that uranium was originally heading for Japan, but the agreements with the Allies led to the uranium. Well, there were two Japanese naval officers on that submarine who were then shot, and the submarine turned around and headed to the United States. It's all detailed by Carter Heydrich in his book Critical Mass. And there's lots of stuff that's come out, particularly about the Second World War, which people obviously have decided they want to tell the world before they die. They've been sworn to secrecy, as people like Ian Fleming were, and the Bond author. And, but towards the end of their lives, a lot of people involved in these operations have started telling us what's going on.
Well, Tony, thank you very much. I learned even more than I thought I was going to learn. I have a lot to research in Google after this interview.
But the main one, the main one is bilderberg.org. Do check that out. I mean, I've got some of the Bormann stuff on there if people are interested in it. I mean, he was Hitler's secretary. He was the treasurer of the Nazi Party. He was thought to have died. I mean, this is still fascinating. I mean, this guy was spirited away by the British to South America. The Russians were hunting him. Stalin was calling Churchill out, saying, "You've got Bormann, haven't you? Hand him over." And then they were denying it. But all the time they were just taking this Nazi money. That's all it was about. And that was a fairly good exchange as far as Winston Churchill was concerned. We take this money in exchange. What we'll do is we'll hide this guy and protect him and give him a new identity, etc., and as many passports as he wants. Of course, it was very good value for money when you consider in 1945 the guy had access to at least $1 billion in hard cash in mostly Swiss accounts, plus a load of other, securities, commodities like gold, etc. So it's not just the Nazi gold; it was the whole loot from the whole of occupied Europe that this guy had control of. And so no wonder Winston Churchill was tempted. He's still thought of in the UK as some sort of great guy, but at the end of the war, he just sold out completely. I mean, I think it's important that people understand just what a scallywag Churchill was.
Yeah, and for more information, if you guys want to learn more, check out also Tony on Twitter. He's always sharing great information and writing some great stuff. And, there's a lot of people here in the U.S. that want to fight Nazis and think there's Nazis lurking around every corner. Well, if you really want to fight the Nazi power structure in a nonviolent way, I suggest you check out the history of the Bilderberg meetings, which Tony has been exposing for decades now. But Tony, thank you very much for coming on. I know you're a very...
And I'd also recommend people particularly have a look at the stuff I've done on the Battle of Arnhem, because you'll see the Americans fought absolutely brilliantly, but the British were basically traitors against their own people. Unbelievable, really, to see that the ground forces at Arnhem in the battle is... Well, people may know it through the film A Bridge Too Far. It ended up being a total disaster, but the British could easily have gone and rescued their own paratroopers in Arnhem. They just sat and waited until the last one died. They waited about 12, 14 hours until the last of the British had been killed in Arnhem on the bridge. Then they started to rumble forward, only when it was too late. But this was a key battle, which was thrown by the Brits. And it shows me that there was there was already deals being done. They didn't want to end the war quickly. They wanted the Russians to have to do all the fighting to Berlin. And it's been a real eye-opener for me. And it's been lovely that I've actually been over to Holland, where this battle took the end of last year, and got a great reception from the Dutch, saying, well, I've got another take on this battle that happened in your town, in Oosterbeek, in Arnhem, and they welcomed me with open arms. And it was fascinating to see how they could embrace that, this conspiracy, because a lot of them are still wondering what the hell happened here. Why was this battle such a disaster? And we're starting to unfold history really as we speak.
And history is so much more interesting than folks realize, especially when you find out what's really going on. And Mr. Tony Gosling is a great place to find that. I'm going to make sure all the links are in the description here. Please share this video, guys. And Tony, thank you so much. You have a great holidays, and hopefully we can speak again sometime in the new year.
We sure will. Take care, Will. God bless.
All right.
Bye-bye.
God bless you. Bye.
Cheers. Thank you.